Good evening, everybody. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here this evening. We're thrilled to have you here, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to our kickoff event with our special guest, Rabbi Aryeh Lebowitz, and in conversation with our Rosh Kollel, Rabbi Reuven Brand. Tonight's sponsor for the evening is Tova and Michael Pearl, and we're very appreciative for them sponsoring this evening's event. Thank you very much. There are a number of people who worked on this evening's event. I'm not going to thank everybody, but I particularly want to thank our board of directors, our development committee, and all of you for being here and taking the time during this particularly busy but important time of year. So thank you, everybody, and without further ado, Rabbi Brand.
Thank you. Gemara Tov, everyone. Good evening. Welcome. To echo Elliot's thank yous, thank you to everyone for being here, and thank you to those who are on a regular basis. It's like at a Yishai Rebo concert when his guitar doesn't work and there's a guy who's running on every 10 seconds to try to get the audio. I'm not saying anything ever happened like that. It takes an incredible and devoted community to sustain and to grow and nurture our Kollel, our community of learning. And so we are Makir Tov collectively to the countless individuals who are here and who are not here, but who enable us to be here. And so we thank not just the Pearls for sponsoring tonight, but all of the supporters and board members and partners. Usually this time of year, tonight would have been our summer event. But instead of a summer event, don't worry, Baruch Hashem, the board members will ask you for a donation after the Yom HaNoraim. But tonight we have a different opportunity of getting together to focus, to think, to talk, to open our hearts to a time of year that requires exactly this. We're saying Avinu Malkeinu at Mincha. We're focusing on longer slichos. We're trying really to grow. And that is the mission of our Kollel year-round, to create a community of learning that nurtures and facilitates the spiritual growth across our Chicagoland Jewish community. And so it's incredibly fitting that we have this evening tonight to come together to foster and to nurture exactly this goal. And who better to do that than someone who is internationally recognized? And this is thanks to the advent of technology, that not only are the Balabatim in his shul, his Beis HaKnesses, the beneficiaries of his teaching, the Talmidim in Yeshivas Rabbeinu Yitzchak Elchanan, the students in RIETS, but so many, literally tens of thousands of people around the world are the beneficiaries of the Torah and the inspiration of Rabbi Aryeh Lebowitz. Rabbi Lebowitz has created his own community of learning that spans every imaginable geographic and demographic boundary. He continues to nurture that with his ongoing shiurim. For those who do not know, he has a daf yomi. He will be giving it tomorrow morning at a very ungodly hour in Chicago. If you want to join on Zoom, let's call it 6 o'clock a.m. in New York time. He also has a 10-minute halacha podcast. He has many wonderful shiurim that are disseminated all across the world through YU Torah. But most importantly for me, he has been a role model and someone who I look to for inspiration. And so I'm honored to share this evening together with Rabbi Aryeh Lebowitz. So without any further ado, Tanu Kavod LaTorah, and welcome Rabbi Aryeh Lebowitz. So instead tonight of a shiur, we talked about the idea of a conversation. Because Chuva is a process. In a certain sense, it's like a conversation. It's like an ongoing conversation that we have with the Ribbono Shel Olam. And he's looking to us to talk to him, and we're looking to listen to him. And in this conversation, Chazal gave us some helpful hints of what we should include. And so one of the things that we need to think about in our conversations with the Ribbono Shel Olam are the past missteps that we've had. And so one of the challenges of tshuva that some of us think about is, how do we relate to this relationship, to this growth, when we come back to the same words every single year. When for some of us, I can only speak for myself, but I come back to the same averos, the same missteps, the same chatoim, missing the mark year after year. So how do we think about this conversation when oftentimes we are in a perpetual state of repetition of the same types of issues?
First of all, can I be heard? Yeah. First of all, I want to thank everybody for coming out this evening, and thank you, Rabbi Brand. The very fact that so many people are here to talk about Chuva, to think about Chuva, that is a huge first step. I mean, that the idea that we take Aseres Yemei Chuva seriously, that we open up our hearts, that we're interested in learning more about Chuva, in figuring out a strategy for Chuva, it's a huge first step. It's like 90% of the job is to open up our hearts. The Ribono Shalom provides a lot of siyata d'shmaya once we've taken that major step. But as far as your actual question, well, let me just give a little bit of a disclaimer in advance. I certainly am no better equipped to answer any of these questions about Chuva than anybody else here, and certainly I'm much less equipped than the gentleman sitting to my right to answer any of these questions about anything in Torah, Hashkafa, Halacha, or anything else. But sometimes a new voice is exciting, so I'm glad to be able to provide that different voice. Rav Moshe Weinberger likes to tell a story of a Gerer Chassid, someone who was learning in a Gerer Yeshiva, and he was really struggling. And every year he was coming back to the same Averos and the same struggles again, over and over again. And he was going to go to Chutz La'aretz, he was going to leave Eretz Yisrael, and he went to the Kotel for one last tefillah. And he saw the Gerer Rebbe at the Kotel. I don't remember which Gerer Rebbe it was. Maybe you know the story. I don't remember which Gerer Rebbe it was. And he ran over to the Gerer Rebbe and he said, I'm going to Chutz La'aretz. Can I have a bracha? And the Rebbe said the strangest thing to him. He said, he said it in Yiddish, but my Yiddish is terrible. I don't want to embarrass myself. And it's a much better story in Yiddish. But he said, I think it's a much better story in Yiddish. I don't really understand Yiddish. But the Rebbe said to him, you should just know one thing. The Eibishter doesn't laugh. The Ribono Shalom doesn't laugh. What? The Ribono Shalom doesn't laugh. And he had no idea what it meant. But apparently the practice in the yeshiva at the time was that the Gerer Rebbe's brother was the Rosh Yeshiva, and when the Rebbe would say cryptic things that you didn't know what he meant, you'd go to the brother and you'd say, can you please give the taich? What's the Pirush Rashi? What did the Rebbe mean? So he went to the Rebbe's brother, he went to the Rosh Yeshiva, and he said, I'm struggling, I'm about to leave Eretz Yisrael, I run to the Kotel, and your brother, the Rebbe tells me the Ribono Shalom doesn't laugh. He said, what my brother meant is that you feel like a fool. Every year you come back to the Ribono Shalom and you say the same Averos that you did over and over again, same thing you did last year. I'm never going to tell Lashon Hara again, and I feel so terrible about Lashon Hara. And Ein Adam Nitzal B'chol Yom from Averos like this. People are always committing Averos like this. Is that realistic? But you should just know, you come with a pure heart in front of the Ribono Shalom. The Ribono Shalom doesn't laugh at you. He doesn't think it's funny. He's not mocking you. He's not saying, oh, this is what you told me last year. Ba'asher hu sham. Right now, at this moment, the Ribono Shalom is accepting whatever you're going to tell him if it's coming from a sincere heart. If you really believe and you're really trying to reach out and you're really striving to be better. So it's nice to know just that the Ribono Shalom is not laughing at us. That's a step one, that Hashem's not laughing at us. But still, I mean, we need a strategy, because the Ribono Shalom may not be laughing at us, but we're laughing at ourselves, because we understand that it's not going to change if these are habits that have developed over years, and every year we say it's not going to happen again, and we keep falling into the same traps. So I think it's important, and this, all the Balei Musar speak about this, and any Rebbe in the yeshiva knows that this is the number one bit of advice you give to someone who's going through a growth period, going through a change of some sort. The Gemara tells us at the end of Maseches Makos, 613 mitzvahs in the Torah. David HaMelech came and narrowed it down to 11 major Yisodos. Then Yeshayahu HaNavi came and he narrowed it down to 6. And then I'm forgetting, I think David HaMelech came again and narrowed it down to 2 or 3, I don't remember. And then Habakkuk came and he narrowed it down to 1. And then now there's only one rule in the Torah. Tzadik be'emunaso yichya. Just one rule in the Torah of Tzadik be'emunaso yichya. That seems like a pretty easy escape route from 613 mitzvahs. Instead of 613 mitzvahs, one mitzvah, emunah. You don't have to worry about anything else. That seems to be, I don't know, can we say apikourses? You're not allowed to erase mitzvahs in the Torah. This past summer I was in Camp Kaylee, and I don't know if anyone here has children who went to Camp Kaylee, but they had a day called Tenu Kavod Torah. Originally they called it Gedolim Day, but then none of the rabbis they invited wanted to come. So because they said, I'm not a Gadol, I'm not going to come, so no one was willing to come. So we'll call it Tenu Kavod Torah Day. So then Rav David Cohn and Rav Reuven Feinstein and Rav Moshe Weinberger and Rav Mordechai Willig all came to camp in one day. So what are you going to do when these 4 giants come to camp in one day? So everyone lines the road and they're singing, Yam Yimei Melech Tosif and Arza Relat Tzadik, and it's beautiful for 5 minutes. And then you have a bunch of 11-year-olds who want to go to their basketball game, and what are they going to do with these Gedolim? So I happen to run a program where we learn all day. We have 19-year-old boys that are learning 3 starim a day. So we got to entertain these 4 Gedolei Torah for the entire day. And one of the boys, we had a question-and-answer session with Rav David Cohn. One of the boys asked Rav David Cohn if the mitzvah of tochecha, of ocheach tochiach, of reprimanding someone who does something wrong, still applies nowadays, which is a fair question to ask, because tochecha presumes that there might be a recipient who receives it well, and we tend to be very, very sensitive in our generation. But Rav David Cohn didn't think it was a fair question to ask. Rav David Cohn immediately responded, does a mitzvah in the Torah still apply? It's apikourses to say that a mitzvah in the Torah doesn't apply anymore. How could you take a mitzvah in the Torah and say that it doesn't apply? So how can Habakkuk narrow it down to 1? So Chaim Shmulevitz explained that it's not that he narrowed it down to one thing. It's that if a person wants to grow, they have to pick one thing to work on. And then you try to pick something that can have a spillover effect to other areas of your life, but you pick that one area that you can try to excel in. And it's a little bit, it sounds like it's much easier than tshuva, than going through all of the full cheshbon and nefesh of everything you've done wrong. But at the same time, it's a little bit more of a responsibility. I heard from Rav Yisrael Reisman Shlita from Torah V'das. He said, can you imagine, he said when his 6-year-old child, many years ago, discovered that there's a thing that you could write a check. I don't even think you can anymore, but no, but that they could write a check. So the kid thought, wow, it's like free money. You don't have to have money. All you have to do is just write a number, and then it'll come. So his son said, Tati, can you write me a $10 check? So he said, why 10? Why not 100? So he said, oh, that's a great idea. Can you write me a $100 check? So why not $1 million? Why don't I write you a $1 million check? Imagine, you write $1 million check to someone. I don't know about you. If I wrote $1 million check to someone, it would not cost me a penny. They'll bring it to the bank. There will be insufficient funds. It will cost the person who's holding the check. You write a check for $1 million, and it won't cost me a penny. But if I write a check for $10, I'll be out $10. When you try to do tshuva on everything, you try to fix everything, it's a check that you don't have sufficient funds to be able to cover. It won't cost you anything, and you will have accomplished nothing. The check will be a waste of time. But you write the check for $10, you work on that one thing, and then you're going to be on the hook for those $10. And I think that's the eitzah that I think all the gedolim and the tzaddikim suggest. Take one area that can have, and I always recommend that let it be an area that can have a spillover effect on other areas of your life. Tzaddik b'emunaso yichya is a wonderful example, because a true bal emunah is constantly contemplating the Ribbon Shalom, and when you're thinking about the Ribbon Shalom, you're less likely to do other averos when you think about the Ribbon Shalom. Your tefillah will be different when you're thinking about the Ribbon Shalom, because there's no greater expression of emunah than tefillah, than davening. That's what Rav Moshe Feinstein writes in a Chuva. Rav Moshe writes that non-Jews are obligated to pray. They're obligated to daven. It's not one of the 7 mitzvahs b'nei Noach. He says, of course it is. Emunah b'Hashem is one of the 7 mitzvahs b'nei Noach. And what kind of emunah could it be if you don't have a conversation, if you're not able to talk to Hashem? So it's going to be different. Your tefillah is going to be different if you have a sense of emunah. Talmud Torah is another good example. People say, should I start the daf? Now, I'm biased. I've been doing daf yomi for a while, and even if you're not going to go on all daf, or you're going to take one of the other magidei shir, if you start the daf, some say, but it's going to take me away from other things that I could be learning. That you could be learning, or that you are learning. Very rarely is it's going to take me away from other things that I'm actually learning. What's more likely to happen is you'll start a daily regiment of learning, and then you're going to say, wow, I'm a learner. I'm someone who learns every day. And if I'm someone who learns every day, when I have some downtime, you know what I should do? I should probably pick up a sefer. And you're going to become a person who's a learner. So it's probably wisest not to think about the same averos that you've done over and over again. Pick one challenge. It shouldn't be too easy. It should be something that's a little bit of a challenge that pushes you just a little bit, a little Kabbalah, and try to choose an area that might be able to have a spillover effect to other areas of our religious existence. And you'll see over time, Be'ez Hashem, we should all live many, many years, that a little bit here and a little bit there, and you're going to see it's not going to be the same averos each and every year, that our whole trajectory changes.
Someone told me, I think, a story from Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, that someone came to him for a Kabbalah suggestion. What should he do for a Kabbalah ben Kesela Asar? So Rabbi Yisrael Salanter said, take a piece of paper and write down the Kabbalah. So the guy takes down the paper and writes the Kabbalah. So Rabbi Yisrael Salanter said, so fold the paper in half and then fold it into a quarter. He said, that's the Kabbalah. Because the notion that if we take something that's too big, that's too overwhelming, that's not sustainable, it's certainly something we can fall into. You're alluding to the fact that, especially in this realm of Bein Adam Lamakom, that we need to really examine the Tzaddik Be'emunaso Yichya, the notion that the Ribbono Shalom is real, and that on Yom Kippur we're not just like running through some grocery list, but that we're engaging with the Ribbono Shalom in a conversation in Tefillah, and that the process of Yom Kippurim, the process of Tshuva, is one in which, so to speak, we're partners, and he's cheering us on. And so there's a Bein Adam Lamakom component to repairing that relationship, and that very much is in the spirit of the Tzaddik Be'emunaso Yichya. Sometimes it's actually easier to focus on that than on the Bein Adam Lachavero. What happens when we have people in our lives that it's become so complicated? How do we navigate when they haven't asked us for mechila, or we ask them for mechila, but we're not sure we can ask them b'leiv shalom? Or how do we navigate some of the more tricky Bein Adam Lachavero mechila questions?
Just before we get to that, you reminded me with that Rabbi Yisrael Salanter story. I heard from Rabbi Yisrael Reisman. I brought my Talmidim in Camp Keli to meet with him in Camp Aguda this summer, and he said that he had some terrible problem with his leg. He needed to have some major surgery when he was a younger man. He still limps from it, and he remembers that someone came into the hospital, someone who had the same surgery a little bit before him, came into the hospital to visit him and say, you're a Ben Torah, you must have taken a Kabbalah after going through such a traumatic thing. What was your Kabbalah? So Rabbi Reisman said, I told the fellow, my Kabbalah was 3 words of Tachanun. I forget which 3 words it was, but he says the 3 words of Tachanun, that I'm going to have more Kavanah during those 3 words of Tachanun. And the fellow said, that's it? That's your Kabbalah? So Rabbi Reisman said, well, you had the same surgery. What was your Kabbalah? So he said some grandiose, very nice, big Kabbalah. So Rabbi Reisman said, so are you still doing it? So the guy said, no, I'm not doing it anymore. So that's the point. If it's not sustainable, it's the $1 million check. Now, the most common tshuva questions that Rabbanim get, I think, this time of year, at least that I get this time of year, are the questions that are of the kind that you were just alluding to, that Rabbi Brandt was just alluding to, which is people are struggling with broken relationships, and particularly when there doesn't seem to be someone on the other side that's interested in repairing the relationship. So, like, to what extent am I supposed to make myself a shmata? The person walked all over me. Or worse, the person walked all over a family member of mine, or humiliated a family. I could be mochel my own kavod. I'm going to be mochel my parents' kavod. I'm going to be mochel someone else's kavod. A woman reached out to me a couple of weeks ago, a remarkable woman, and she said that her father I happen to know who her father is. Her father is a very, very prominent person. He's a well-known philanthropist, a very, very prominent Jew. Probably, if I said his last name, you would all know it. And she said that someone found an old picture of her father and put a caption on it, made a meme out of it, and it was very inappropriate, like something extremely embarrassing and humiliating, and posted it on social media and just put it out there. And she said this person was a friend of her husband's, and she's so hurt that someone could do something like this. So she said, do I have to forgive a person like this? Do I have to, what am I supposed to do? Am I even allowed to pretend that things are okay when I see such a person? Should I dafka show him that I'm angry at him? Should I dafka not show him that I'm angry at him and be above it all and pretend that everything is fine? And I think in that case the answer is, there is an issur in the Torah, lo sisnas achicha b'lvavecha, that one is not allowed to hate somebody in their heart. According to many Rishonim, the issur is to harbor hatred in your heart and not express it. If you express what you're feeling, you're not in violation of that issur. You may be in violation of other issurim, but you're not in violation of that issur. That's what Rashi and Chumash writes, that from the brothers of Yosef, that they were not able to speak nicely to Yosef, mitoch genusan, from speaking of their shortcomings, we learn shivchan, we learn their great praise, that at least they were honest with him. Because to leave someone vulnerable, someone who thinks that you're their friend, and you really can't stand them, and you really don't like them, and you're really angry at them, that leaves them very vulnerable. Because people have a certain sense of, they let their guard down in front of their friends. And they may open themselves up a little bit more. And if they think they can trust you, but they really can't, so that's unfair to do to a person. But I told the woman, I think the best thing to do is to approach the person and tell him that you were very hurt by what he did, and you want to be mochlim, but you're just having a hard time because you were very hurt by what he did. And I said, if you can't say that in a nice and respectful way, have your husband say it in a nice and respectful way, someone who's maybe less emotionally attached. She actually found me. I was giving a shiur in her neighborhood a week later. She tracked me down and she came to tell me that she confronted the fellow, and the fellow, because she said it so nicely, she's such a sweet lady, the fellow broke down. He said, I'm so sorry. I really just thought it was funny. I didn't realize that this was something that was so embarrassing. I should have realized it was so silly of me. And he was very contrite and he apologized, and the relationship was repaired. Most often, not everybody's reasonable, but most often, if one party is speaking in a way that is humble, sincere, and genuinely interested in shalom, there will be someone from the other party to respond. There are people that have emotional issues. There are people that are not able to have proper relationships with other people. And they step on people's toes a lot, and they do hurtful things sometimes, and sometimes there's a lack of contrition. So a person has to realize two things, I think. First of all, sometimes it's a nebuch. You have to daven for the other person, that they're so socially off that they're unable to be able to have meaningful relationships. And what does this mean for their children? What does this mean for their marriage? And what does this mean? And you daven for the person, that the person should be able to function more fully as a tzelem elokim. And the other thing that a person should realize is what Yosef HaTzadik said. The brothers come to Yosef after Yaakov died, and they figured they're about to get it. They're about to he's about to come at them because he probably was just being nice to them while the father was alive, but as soon as the father's gone, they're in big trouble. And they say, Dad really said you should be nice to us. And Yosef says, you have nothing to worry about. Don't be sad. Nothing to be sad about. You tried to do something bad to me, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu was chashav l'tova. Hashem thought of this saved humanity. Can you imagine if you didn't sell me down as a slave to Egypt? Then everyone would have starved. The whole world would have starved. You did a great mitzvah. It was wonderful. They didn't do a great mitzvah. They did an avera that we're still paying the price for. It was not a great mitzvah. But a person has to realize that if HaKadosh Baruch Hu makes something happen in our lives, that's something that was meant to happen to us. Whether this person was going to be the shliach or something else was going to be the shliach, whatever struggles we have are the struggles that we're meant to have. The Talmud Torah writes that if a person suffers bizyonos, if a person suffers embarrassment, they should dance and sing. They should be excited and happy, because that's the kind of yisurin that paves your path to Olam Haba. That's the kind of yisurin that wipes away a person's averos, and it's so much better than the other types of yisurin. Health problems, tsar gidul banim problems, all the parnasa problems, a little bizyonos, okay? Our Rebbe, one of our Rebbeim, Rabbi Willig, told me once that his children walked into the kitchen once, he was on the phone, and he was dancing. He was dancing. And the children said, why are you dancing? He said, he's pointing to the phone. The person, he holds out the speaker. They're screaming and yelling at him, and they're screaming bizyonos at him and telling him what a terrible person he is. He's dancing because he's experiencing these bizyonos. If we had a little bit more of that attitude, maybe we'd be able to depersonalize a little bit. It's not that this person did this to me. This happened to me. This person has their own issues. We try our best to smooth over the relationships. It's not always doable, but at the end of the day, we realize that whatever we're suffering because that's all part of the Ribono Shalom's plan.
We were talking earlier today about Reb Melech Biderman. I don't know how many people follow this tremendous mashpia in Eretz Yisrael. We're missing someone to drop the coffee. That we need to be changing the coffee. If whoever watches Reb Melech, it's like a whole experience between the coffee changing and the various other things that are going
The
on.
various other things, yes.
So Reb Melech loves this topic because he always quotes from Shlomo Zvil, who was very into this, that he had Nebuch once a daughter who was very ill. So he went to find a person in the neighborhood who was slightly not 100% so that he could come across her in the street. Then she started screaming at him, giving the biggest bizyonis, and he thought it was the best thing ever because now, Baruch Hashem, he comes back, his daughter is much better, everything is fine. So I think the bizyonis factor sometimes, if we're on that level, to realize that, that part of life is sometimes struggling with that. But I think also maybe another element for us, not necessarily that we are on that level, but to aspire to, the whole koach of tshuva, the Rebbe Shalom gives it to us as a gift. It's really a matana. And in many ways, it's not just about repairing our relationship with the Ribono Shalom, but enabling us to live healthy and emotionally balanced lives. And it's interesting that as part of the tshuva process, we begin Yom Kippur night, for many of us, with Tefillah Zaka. Tefillah Zaka is the koach of letting go for the people who wronged us. And some of the Sfarim point out that the koach of Tefillah Zaka is something that many of us tap into every night. When we say Berachas Hamapil, we start and we let go of the people who may have wronged us that day. Why is that? Mistama, on Yom Kippur, it's because there's a reciprocal element that we want to make sure if everybody says Tefillah Zaka, so all of the interpersonal issues that maybe I've done to somebody else, so they'll be mochel me. So there's a reciprocal element, but maybe part of this process that the Rebbe Shalom is gifting us through this Bein Adam Lachavero is that we can let go of that anger. How healthy is it for us? Many of us have had instances of those kinds of damaged or difficult relationships, and when we hold on to that anger, who ultimately suffers from that? We suffer from that. Do we want to be mitching ourselves all the time? It's not easy to let it go, but maybe the truth is that when we do tap into that Tefillah Zaka, that Mechila that we can give, it can make it just a little bit easier to live our own lives in the sphere of influence that we can control.
Holding on to a grudge, I think they describe it as punching yourself in the face and expecting it to hurt your friend. It hurts ourselves. It hurts us much more than it hurts anybody else.
So maybe let's shift a little bit into the values-based element of tshuva. That there are certain values, there are certain aspects of life that in every generation and every individual we need to think about what are things that we can grow in. Right? Tshuva, on one level, there's part of tshuva that's about fixing, that's about rectifying, but most of tshuva, the overwhelming arc of tshuva, is about reimagining ourselves, about being our best selves, about rebirthing ourselves in the way that we want to be. And in every generation and every year, we need to have that exploration, we need to have that imagination for ourselves. So I don't know what it's like in North Woodmere, but we have various community issues here. Maybe there are certain trends that are going on in the world, but maybe there are also individual issues, things that maybe we need to think about that we can envision for ourselves for a better future in the Tkufa of Chuva. What would you say?
I would have been much less comfortable talking about something so broad in a community that's not my own pre-COVID. Talking to rabbis throughout the country and really throughout the world, many of us are going through the same issues, the same problems. There are so many, but let me just identify maybe two issues. One is, one of the phrases that we used a lot during COVID was, the Ribono Shalom wanted me to daven with a minyan, now the Ribono Shalom wants me not to daven with a minyan. Pikuach nefesh is docha kol haTorah kula. And that's true. And it was 100% true, and that was our avoda, and that's what we were supposed to do. We were supposed to not daven with a minyan for a while. We were supposed to be docha kol haTorah kula for the sake of pikuach nefesh, without a doubt. We cannot forget that there is a cost in being docha kol haTorah kula. That there's a cost in a lack of kedusha in our lives. There's a cost to tefillah that did not get to enjoy a Yehei Shmei Rabbah, that did not get to enjoy a makom kadosh of the Beis HaKnesses. We had to do it. There's no doubt that we had to do it. But it costs us something. It hurts us. And we have to try to make up for that cost. The level of comfort that we find that in so many areas, so many segments of Klal Yisrael, where I could get used to this kind of Judaism. This isn't so bad. It's like when we issued instructions at the very beginning of the pandemic, how to daven b'yechidus. Someone calls up his rabbi and says, "Rabbi, I've done this for many years. you don't need to tell me how to daven b'yechidus. You don't have to give me instructions about how to do this." And we've all become that person. Not we've all, but so many people have become that person. All of a sudden, minyan's not so important, and many of the opportunities for kedusha aren't so. They should be more important to us. Those opportunities, when they are appropriate, when they're the right thing. Pikuach nefesh, being docha kol haTorah kula, the impact that should have had on us should be an elevation of our understanding of the importance of pikuach nefesh. Not a degradation or a downgrading of our understanding of the value of tefillah and the value of kedusha in our lives. There's a drasha that Rav Soloveitchik gave in Yiddish and has never been translated. I assume it was to rabbinic alumni of yeshiva, because he totally lambasted the rabbanim. I can't imagine he would have done it to anybody else other than the rabbis themselves. And he really gave very strong, direct musar to the rabbis. And there's a fellow that translated this drasha. It's 30 pages long. It's a magnificent drasha. I received it in an email that said, "For your eyes only." We're thinking about giving it out at the Chag Semicha. It said, "For your eyes only," but that was written to the fellow who forwarded me the email, so I think I'm okay. So
like
got it? Okay.
It's like Rav Weinberger says, the secret is something you tell one Jew at a time.
Right. So he tells a story. Rav Soloveitchik tells a story about his grandfather that I had never heard before. He told two stories about his grandfather, about Reb Chaim. One of them was a famous story that everyone's heard. The other one I had never heard before. Maybe you haven't. Forgive me if you've heard this story. He said that one year in Brisk, there was a teenage boy who threw some sort of explosive device or something at the Governor General of Warsaw. And the child who did this was a Jewish boy from Brisk. And he was a Bundist. He said, as far as religion goes, he was an enemy of the Jewish people. His hashkafa in the world, he was worse than an apikoros, worse than an atheist. He was an enemy of the Jewish people. And word came to Reb Chaim as they were about to start Kol Nidre on Yom Kippur night that this boy was sentenced to death. This 16-year-old boy from Brisk was sentenced to death. And 24 hours from now, he was going to be killed. Reb Chaim stopped Kol Nidre in the main shul in Brisk. He gave a clap on the bima and he said, "Everybody has to go home now and come back with as much money as you can scrape up on Yom Kippur." He then sent the gabbai to every shul in Brisk and said, "Nowhere in Brisk tonight will Kol Nidre be recited. Everyone has to go home and bring money to the shul." And they gathered 3,000 rubles from all these poor Jews in Brisk. And they went to someone of influence, to the police commissioner, and they offered him the 3,000 rubles to help get the boy off the hook. And the police commissioner, Rav Chaim, traveled on a train on Yom Kippur morning together with the police commissioner after having canceled Yom Kippur night for the entire city of Brisk. And mind you, this is Brisk. You know, I'm sure there's some of us where if they say, Yom Kippur night, you don't have to come to shul. Oh, okay, not so. I can live with that. No, this was Brisk. This was like heartbreaking for people. He got on a train on Yom Kippur to bribe this police commissioner, who then crossed himself and swore that the boy was with him in Brisk on that day, and he gave him an alibi, and the boy got off the hook. When we say pikuach nefesh is docha kol Torah kula, right? So what would we do? I'm a rabbi of shul. Someone comes and says that Rabbi say before Kol Nidre a capital of Tehillim. Okay, with kavana. Oh, he's a Bundist? Not so much kavana. Just a capital of Tehillim. That's what we would do. But when you really internalize a value, and it really means something to you, it's taken to a much greater degree. For those of us who may know, one of our Rebbeim, Rav Meir Twersky Shlita, has been extremely vigilant still with COVID protocols and beyond any protocols that you would ever imagine, and that comes from this tradition. That it doesn't come because he's an overly nervous person, or he's somehow blowing things out of proportion. It comes from this tradition of taking pikuach nefesh so seriously, and I think as a community we need to ask ourselves how much of the effect of this has been understanding just how serious pikuach nefesh is, and how much has it been downgrading in our minds the value of kedusha and the value of the kol Torah kula that pikuach nefesh was docha. So I think that's one thing to work on. Because my answers are a little long-winded, I apologize. The other thing I'll try to say much more quickly. I think that there's at least where I come from, we thought at the beginning of the pandemic that it was going to bring everyone together. You know, when you're under fire, it brings everyone together. That was very short-lived. It's just like this country is ripped apart because everyone has to affiliate with this party, that party, and therefore everyone is on one side or the other. We found in the Jewish world, at least where I come from, that communities that used to be unified have become divided. Talmidei Chacham we used to respect, people often don't respect anymore. And there's a lot of work to be done to repair that, and do more than repair that, to really build bridges, to realize that many people are l'shem shemayim, even if misguided, are acting what they believe to be l'shem shemayim, and B, that if somebody's wrong about something, it doesn't always make them a rasha. And we have to be able to look at a Jewish world that's able to come together. Anu matirin l'spalel im ha'avaryanim. It doesn't say anywhere in any svarim that there's a maila in being a Rosh Yeshiva, that you're supposed to strive to be a Rosh Yeshiva, that you should want to be a Rosh Yeshiva. There's nothing about being a Rosh Yeshiva, but there's a lot in svarim about being a Marbitz Torah. And let me tell you how to be a Marbitz Torah. Look around your classroom, find a boy who's struggling and is having a hard time with learning, and go and help him out on your free time. And then you'll be a Marbitz Torah, and that's better than being a Rosh Yeshiva. The kid was thinking about greatness. Rav Lapiansky said, stop thinking about greatness. Think about bigness. Think about how to be big in the moment. I think that's a very important message of Chuva and of just self-improvement. Greatness is not something we can cash in on, but bigness is something we can do many times a day.
And maybe that comes back to where you started, of not tackling everything, but finding those nikudas, those small areas in which we can really express our true inner big selves, our godless selves.
Absolutely, yeah.
We could do this for a long time, but some of us have slichas, some of us have many hachanas to make. Just want to express again our hakaras hatov to Rabbi Lebowitz for making the trip, for making this time, for being machazik, all of us, for being machazik the Kollel in the community. I want to thank all of you for coming, the various stakeholders who have in the past and continue into the future being machzik our Torah. Thank you to the Pearls, to Tova and Mikey for this evening, for sponsoring. And best wishes to all of us that we should be zoche to pursue, not to accomplish greatness, but to pursue some of the themes that we talked about tonight, in terms of letting go when it's bein adam lechavero, trying to figure out ways that we can talk openly with people. It's the end of that pasuk of the idea of focusing on one area, one Kabbalah, and making it stick. The idea of thinking about how we not only take Pikuach Nefesh seriously, but also take our Ruchnius values seriously, and how we can become those big people that the Rebbe Shalom has given us the gift and the ability to become. A good yar and a Gemar Chasim Tova to everyone. Thank you for coming.
Gemar Chasim Tova, everybody.
Hashikoyach.